Thank you once again tuning in with 28 Days, where we're celebrating our culture, our heritage, our history, and our stories. And today we have a distinguished guest, as promised. Dr. Cato, welcome to the set.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Cato, give us a snapshot of who you are. You look like a man of wisdom.
Don't let looks fool you, okay? I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
So I'm a product of well, whatever that is, the Midwest, but the Midwesterners tell us we're still East.
Okay.
Did my undergraduate work at Oberlin College in some strange mixture of studies in Chinese and East Asian history.
Wow.
A master's degree in American history with a concentration in the African American experience, and then a PhD from Howard University in African studies.
Okay. Now, coming from Cleveland and matriculating and navigating the waters from the Midwest and coming to the East Coast, if you can say that, what were some of the differences that you saw?
Well, I think one of the reasons that I ended up in Philadelphia is not so much because of difference, but a sense of comfort and belonging. I thought that Philadelphia, particularly its black community, when I first landed here many, many years ago, was one of the most caring and kindest communities I had ever envisioned. Bus drivers helping people off of buses with baby carriages and wheelchairs, people who would come up to you on the street on a cold, rainy day and place their umbrella over you. I felt that it was a great place to be. And then I thought that the people here were beautiful, and that they had a real sense of history, or there was at least a real sense of history that contextualized their being here. And because I'm a historian, that attracted me.
Now, being a distinguished historian, what cultural context did you grow up in to make you take that route when it came to your education?
Well, I grew up in a household of people who valued education. They were not necessarily educators. They were not, none of them, at least in my parents' generation, would go on and have college degrees, but they understood the value of education. And I knew from the time I was a very young person that the thing that would be most worthy to do in life would to be in education, to be an educator.
So being a research scholar, being a historian, and understanding the cultural dynamics of African Americans on this continent as well as the mother continent, what are some of the things that you have discovered or unpacked in your research and in your experience?
Well, the most important thing over time has been the notion that people of African descent have to place themselves on a world stage.
Okay.
They have to understand that there are spaces in which we exist that are far-flung from Africa, even though Africa is the center of it all, and that there are places that we exist that are not just simply the United States of America. We're a global people, and we have to assume global responsibility and global proportions in terms of what we do, how we think, and how we comport ourselves.
What are some of the complexities that, when it comes to African Americans as well as Africans, and our thought process when it comes to identity? Could you expound on that?
Well, our identity is pretty much circumscribed by the notion that we think we're the only ones.
Okay.
And in thinking we're the only ones, we fail to consider that there are people of African descent, as I said before, all over the world. So one of the current debates, or at least not so distant debates that have gone on in the African American intellectual community, is the inability to recognize that there are people of African descent who call themselves British or French or Italian or even Saudi. And so those kinds of things limit our ability to engage intellectually on a global scale. And it limits our abilities to really understand who we are in relationship to people out there in the world.
Who has decided, from your research and your experience, how to categorize people when it comes to the identity, like who's black, who's African, who's German, who's Greek, etc.?
Well, those categorizations, they vary, but what we need to realize is that we're a part of that categorization as well.
Okay.
In other words, we have agency in terms of determining how we might function in relationship to how we are characterized, how we're named, again, how we carry ourselves. So I'm always, I think about an episode in one of those spin-offs, I think A Different World,
Okay.
in which one of the youngsters was thinking about the notion of being called a mammy. And what she did was she thought about that terminology, and then she decided to possess it and then to play it on itself, to realize, to give rise to the notion of what exactly that meant. I think for African Americans, one of the ways in which that can be played out most dramatically is to consider what it means to be a slave. In conventional culture, in the culture of the late 19th, early 20th century, people who were apologists for slavery would say the slaves did nothing. Well, in retrospect, we know the slaves did everything.
Mm-hmm.
That slaves made it possible for free labor to exist. Slaves, in effect, in large measure, created everything that we see in the modern world today. And then we need to understand that there were different kinds of slaves. And not every slave looked like you or me.
Mm-hmm.
That there were people who were forced to give up their labor, forced to give up the products of their labor, forced to give up their bodies in order to make this space into what it is. And in some ways, they not only need to be celebrated, okay, for what they have created, their participation in this creation, but they also need to have some sense of compensation.
Okay.
And in that sense of compensation, I'm not talking about money or anything else, but I'm talking about the right, the ability, the reward to fully participate in the society that they help to create.
What are some of the ways that people can get in contact with you to find out some of this research?
Well, they can always go to my webpage at Villanova,
Okay.
and my email address is there. And I guess it's pretty easy to find some of the stuff I've done by simply doing a Google. So
Okay. So
Yeah.
give people that your email address as well as that.
My email address is Maghan, MAGHAN .Keita, KEITA, at villanovauniversity.edu.
Wow. Thank you once again for coming to the set. And I
My
want you to
pleasure.
Google his name and get rich history. We thank you once again for tuning in with 28 Days, where we're celebrating our heritage, our culture, our history, and our stories. And as promised, we're going to continue to bring in distinguished guests. We look forward to you tuning in tomorrow, where we'll meet another person. Have a great day.